Hi all, this is Kevin Bernatz of Doc Beer Nuts Development. We're going to talk a little bit about On to Paris, which Compass is getting ready to make available for everyone. I'm just going to work through a walkthrough. I'm start with the sequence of play. And the very first thing that players do each turn is basically bring in reinforcements, leaders, strength points, and if there's any wounded leaders, they would be returned to command, etc. And then after that, players go to what we call the resource phase. And in this, you are basically trying to determine where you want the focus of your action for the upcoming turn. You have 3 of these resource logistic or RL markers, and you're going to place them in different locations, either on a infantry or army unit or on like a fortress, etc. And you do it without the other player knowing which one you're placing on each hex. They'll see you place one, but they won't know whether it's your primary, secondary, or tertiary one. So let's sort of walk through that. This is one of the turns of, actually, this is the start of the main scenario. It starts on turn 2. There's a what-if scenario that starts on turn 1 if players wish to do that. But the main scenario starts on turn 2, and this is the setup along the German or Prussian-French border. And so the French start placing a resource marker. So they place one on Metz, and then the Prussians put one on their second army, and then it alternates until all 6 have been placed. And then both players reveal them, and so you can see the French have their primary, it looks like on the Army of the Rhine, and the primary for the Prussians is on their second army, which is their biggest army, and so on and so forth. The next step is both players will roll for command points. And you can see, depending on the roll, each of these resource logistic markers, as well as a discretionary pool, gets a certain number of command points. Most of the sums are within 1 or 2 of each other, so players don't have to worry about whether they get an unlucky roll here and there. It's really just the relative distribution of the points more than the total value of the points. So in this case, France, they roll a 3. So you can see their primary gets 8, secondary 6, so on and so forth. And they'll mark that on we actually have a general records track. I should make a note that most of the graphics here are playtest graphics still. So what you're going to get in the final published version will be much different. Tim is a much better artist than some of the stuff that I came up with. So the French mark the number of command points that they get, and then the Prussians also roll. They get a 5, and they mark theirs. So then the next part of the turn is the action phase. And in this, both players basically roll 3d6 for initiative. And you can see the French have rolled a 9 and the Prussians have rolled a 12. And you compare that difference. The side with the higher roll becomes the initiative player, and they'll conduct their actions first. And the number of initiative points, or IPs, that they'll use is equal to that difference. So in this case, Prussians won the initiative, and they'll have 3 IPs to conduct actions. Now, after they've conducted their actions, the French will conduct their actions. They will also have 3 IPs. And so you might have a marker you place on the 3 to indicate the number of IPs available to spend. We also want to, it's not in this playtest version, but we have a marker to denote what that difference was, so players don't have to try to remember what was the actual difference that we rolled. This way it's a little easier, a little less record keeping for the players. So the first thing the Prussians do in this playtest is they spend 1 of their IPs and 1 of their CPs. They choose to spend it from the primary command. Really, you can spend CPs or command points from any RL marker, but if you're outside of the RL marker's range, which is 5 for the Prussians and 4 for the French, you have to add 1 additional CP cost. So it's really inefficient to expend from RL markers that aren't within the command range. So what we have is, to denote this, players simply slide down the markers, denote 1 CP, 1 IP spent, and the Prussian player would place a pontoon bridge over that major river hex side. And then for their last two IPs, they choose to activate a single army. You can see there, it's activate and move a lone army with up to all its attachments. So the way armies work is all armies have corps or cavalry divisions attached to them, and different armies can attach different numbers of these units. And the way to efficiently activate a lot of units is to activate the army and its attachments. For the French, this costs 3 command points. For the Prussians, 2. And for either side, it's 2 initiative points. So they will move the initiative points to 0 and move their secondary command, secondary command marker down 2, so from 7 to 5. This is the marker that's actually on the first army. Now, they could have spent them from the primary command. It doesn't have to be the army that is activated. It's just any RL marker that's within range. And in this case, they choose to spend it from the one right on the army. And if you look at the army card, and this is final graphics, this is from Tim, you'll see you have the first army. It can have at most 4 corps and 2 cavalry divisions attached to it. It can have at most 4 strength points, which is what it has, as denoted by the leader, which is von Steinmetz. He is in the 4 SP marker box, which indicates that's the strength of the army unit. And then the attachments, you have the 7th and 8th Corps, and yes, these are plate test counts, so you see that the corps denotion there, those we fixed that, don't worry about that. And then you have the 1st and 3rd Cavalry Division also attached to this army. And I just show that there. Those are the attachments. And then the player conducts movement. So we have a couple different ways that movement can be done. The main way is you keep track of individual movement points for each unit. Corps armies have at most 4, cavalry divisions 5, leader movement alone has 12. Strength points also have 4 unless they're the French guerrillas or francs-tireurs, which I believe only have 2 movement points. And this can be a little complicated, and so we realize that some players may not want this complexity or this level of quote-unquote realism. And an alternative optional rule is when you're moving multiple units, because all these units must move together. So you don't move one unit, one movement point, finish its move, and then move another. That's not the way it works here. If all these units are activated and they all want to move one hex that costs 1 movement point, you move all of them before you move anyone with their second movement point, and so on. So an alternative method, trying to keep track of, this unit has moved 3 movement points, but this unit's only moved 2, and so trying to enter a hex that maybe costs 3 MPs, so it doesn't have enough to move there yet. We have an optional rule that says, okay, you move everyone 1 hex, and then everyone is charged the highest MP cost. So it's a slightly easier way to do it if that's what players want. It works perfectly fine. We're doing this playtest with the rules as written, which is each unit tracks its moving points individually. We recommend rotating counters, but you can do it any way that is convenient to you. So in this case, the first movement point, the 1st Cavalry Division begins to cross the pontoon bridge, which basically costs a total of 3 movement points, because there's a minor river, that's a major river, which is plus 2 movement points. And actually, I think it's going to be 4 movement points total, because I think there's also a hex side. I can't see it under here, but I believe there's also a forest hex side that is also being crossed, which adds another movement point for the cavalry division. Von Steinmetz's army and the 3rd Cav stacked with it move into the clear hex where the 1st Cav currently is. That's only 1 movement point. And the 7th and 8th Corps simply pause in place. This is important because pausing in place or the actual movement into a new hex triggers reaction. And so in this case, the pause is sort of denoted by the crescent shape, and then the movement has a secondary command and arrow into that 1 hex. Both of those trigger reaction by the French. So the French reaction, basically, as I said, if you spend movement points or enter new hex in that unit's zone of influence. Corps' zone of influence is 1 hex, armies are 2. Then they can attempt to react. And they can react either individually or as one army, if the army is eligible to react. In this case, we have the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Corps, the 4th Cavalry Division, and the Army of the Rhine all get to react. The French player decides to have them all attempt to react individually. The only unit that is successful, however, is the 2nd Corps. It needed a 6, and it rolled a 6. Now, most Corps need a 5 or higher. There's different modifiers. The moving unit is across a river, it adds +1, and so on and so forth. And so that's why it needed a 6, and it did succeed in rolling a 6. And so it falls at 1 hex. Reaction is generally going to be 1 hex unless you roll much higher than the number that you need, in which case you can get up to 2 hexes. However, if you're crossing any sort of hexside terrain or entering a hex that is more than 1 MP, it counts as 2 hexes. So, for example, trying to react across a river, you would have to roll high enough to get 2 movement points of reaction. Okay, so then the Prussian player continues their movement. So now their second move, the 1 cav is still crossing the pontoon bridge. The Army, 7th Corps, and 3rd Cavalry Division declare that they're crossing the minor river into the hex occupied by the 4th Corps. And I emphasize this, they're declaring the movement. It costs 2 movement points to complete that movement, 1 for the clear terrain, plus 1 for the minor river. So they're not actually entering the hex yet. They won't enter it until their 3rd MP phase or sub-phase. However, the 8th Corps still doesn't know what it wants to do, so it spends 1 moment pausing in the hex. Well, that pause triggers reaction again. And the units that can react are pretty much the units that are adjacent to it, and then the Army of the Rhine. So the 2nd Corps cannot react because it is now 2 hexes away, and its zone of influence is only 1 hex. French roll poorly, and they don't actually get any reaction to succeed. So on the 3rd movement, we have von Steinmetz's army, the 7th Corps, and the 3rd Cav cross the river and enter the hex with the French 4th Corps. I show that the cavalry division crossing the pontoon, so there is a forced hex side there as well. So it won't reach that new hex until its 4th movement point. And again, the 8th Corps chooses to pause because it doesn't know what the French reaction is going to be. It doesn't want to vacate Saarbrücken, which would be able to be entered by, for example, the 4th Cavalry Division, etc. So again, this triggers reaction. In this case, the French player again attempts to have everyone react separately. The 4th Corps tries to run away and fails. So I actually say the 2nd Corps attempts to react, but that is actually incorrect. Again, I take it back. No, the 2nd Corps could react here because the Prussians entered the hex directly next to it. So it is within the zone of influence. And in fact, they get a positive modifier for the reaction roll because the hex contains friendly strength points. They're not in the 4th Corps, but there's strength points in the hex. Sort of think about them. They send out a rider to say, hey, the Prussians are coming. But they roll poorly and fail to react. The Army of the Rhine, however, does succeed in reacting, but only gets 1 hex of reaction. If it had received 2 hexes of reaction, it could have entered the combat hex and joined the 4th Corps. So what the Prussians may have thought would have been a battle in their favor suddenly could have become a very even fight. Instead, they were simply moved to shore up the line and make sure that there's no gap down in that area. So this results in a combat. Now I'm going to show the combat in another video, but basically because both sides end up in the same hex during the movement, you pause and you'll resolve this combat. If the Prussians win and they still have movement points, in this case they would still have 1 movement point left, they could continue their movement. If they're forced to retreat, they would have to go back into the hex from which they entered the combat. So, this was the action phase. After the action phase finishes, like I mentioned before, the French will also spend 3 initiative points. And then both players will again roll 3d6, see who's the highest, and continue this alternating expenditure of these initiative points. And this continues until all players run out of basically all the reinforcements, or if they tie on these initiative rolls, 3d6 rolls, a certain number of times. And there's a minimum number of phases or minimum number of these segments that must occur, so that if you don't happen to get an unlucky string of ties right off the bat, it's not going to impact things. But essentially, that's another way that the turn has this variable end, this action phase has a variable ending. That if you happen to get a couple ties, you could end before you've actually entered all your reinforcements, used all your command points, etc. So once the action phase ends, if there's any sieges that are ongoing, and there usually will be once the game starts to progress, then each siege you roll once to see if the siege progresses favorably. It can actually progress negatively if you roll bad enough. And then there is a rally phase. And I'm going to go back. So the rally phase, if there's demoralized units, they basically lose 1 strength point and then become undemoralized. And you also check to see if the French Empire has collapsed or if there's other VP penalties that might need to be applied. And then in the next video, I'll walk through the combat that we had here and show you how the combat system works. Thank you for watching.